What is going on, guys? Skullrider here. Welcome to the second progress report of my yearly album challenge. Now, if you're watching and aren't sure what exactly this challenge is, I recommend you go and check out my previously uploaded video titled A Very Important Channel Announcement. But to give you all a super quick and brief summary, this challenge has me listening to an album a day from a list off Rate Your Music, which consists of the most highly rated albums on the site. In each of these weekly progress reports, I will be ranking and discussing each of the albums that I listened to in this past week. But yeah, with all that aside, let's get right into the content. Alright, so for album number 359, we got The Sound of Perseverance by Death. This is an album that I am not familiar with, and I definitely had some mixed feelings about this one. Like, in general, I'd say I'm a fan of metal music, but I've never really heard metal quite like this before. But let's start off with what I really liked in this album. The first of which being the absolute crazy instrumentation. There were just so many sudden changes, like, would I be right to say that this would be progressive metal? Cause there was some absolute crazy stuff going on. I especially liked the parts of this album where the guitars and drums would start suddenly playing at these ungodly speeds. I would definitely like to admit that I got a lot of headbanging action into those parts. And sometimes that bass could get crazy funky, which was very surprising to hear. Also, the inclusion of acoustic guitar in Voice of the Soul had this really cool and haunting feeling to it. Like, I never would have guessed that there'd be an acoustic guitar in this album, but it served as a really nice change of pace. But yeah, overall, there's just so much substance here instrumentally that I feel like if I go back and listen to this record again, I'll discover so much stuff that I may have missed the first time around. Also, a pleasant surprise in this album, I had no idea that the closing song would be a cover of the Judas Priest Painkiller, and it was pretty freaking epic. But alright, my major hesitation on putting this record at A or above is the vocals. Now let me just say, I didn't hate all of it. I didn't hate it just because it was like screaming. Honestly, by the end of the album, they were admittedly starting to grow on me a little bit. However, there were some moments where I felt like it just went on and I just couldn't do it. I don't know, just those super high-pitched vocals don't really do much for me. But I don't know, like, who knows, maybe if more metal albums with voices of this caliber appear in this ranking, I'll be able to tolerate it more. But right now, I just found them frankly kind of annoying, and sometimes they ruin some really good, epic instrumentals. With all those pros and cons taken into account with this album, I think I have to put it into low B tier. Alright, so for album number 358, we have Rush's Moving Pictures, a truly classic prog rock album right here. So despite me actually owning a vinyl of this bad boy, I have actually only listened to this record 3 times before I listened to it again for this video. And I'll just say, this record just keeps getting better and better the more I listen to it. I think I still have to say that Farewell to Kings is my favorite Rush record, so it better be on this list. But now I really feel like Moving Pictures has gotta be right up there with it. Like, for some reason, nothing really stood out the first time I listened to this record. Besides just really liking Tom Sawyer and Limelight, nothing else on here really seemed like top tier Rush to me. But I don't know, now after listening to this thing for the 4th time, like, all the songs on here I really enjoy. Sonically, this album is like a perfect blend between their progressive rock sound in the 70s and their eventual transition to an 80s synth-heavy era. Another thing I gotta say about this album is that Geddy's vocals are like peak on here. Like, don't get me wrong, I think he's got a great voice in general, but there's something about this album where it's just exceptional. Also, the songs in here just fit so well together despite all of them being so good as standalones. But alright, now let's talk about the instrumentation, which... it's Rush, come on, it's gonna be good. The thing that's always amazed me about their instrumentation is that they have such a perfect balance between the crazy stuff the guitar, the drums, and the bass are all doing. Like, man, it's just so good. And because I'm not sure if I'll be encountering another Rush record on this list, I gotta take a quick side tangent to talk about just how good Neil's drumming is. Now, as being a drummer myself, I've played along with a lot of rock stuff, so I can tell you that Neil's playing is something truly special. With all of his parts, the way he plays is just so perfect. It's like there's no other better or different way to play it. Like, if I'm playing along to any of their songs on the drums, the way Neil does it is just how it's done. But okay, that's enough nerding out. Let's actually rank this album. So clearly, it's A tier. And man, I gotta put this one high, maybe right below Ole. Yeah, I feel like that's a solid placement. Alright, moving on to album number 357, we have Here Come the Warm Jets by Brian Eno. So, not only have I never heard of this album before, I've never even heard of Brian Eno. So, believe me when I say I really had no idea what to expect when getting into this album. So, the first track started off from sounding like some kind of 80s sitcom opening, but by the time I got to the third track, the music transmutated into this really ominous and foreboding song. But honestly, every song on this record felt like it was a different genre, or a different subgenre of rock. Honestly, at first, I felt like the instrumentation was a bit much, mainly in the opening track. It was just kind of too noisy and not much there. But as the album progressed, I could definitely appreciate just how creative this is musically. Like, the best way to describe the overall sound of this album is like a Velvet Underground / Talking Heads kind of feel. But all in all, it's just very experimental. Especially the track Blank Frank, which was totally out of left field and had levels of craziness to that of a Zappa track. I definitely really appreciated Eno's voice too. It's very comparable to Bowie's voice, but it almost had like this Elvis flair to it. But yeah, this was overall a really fun and interesting album to listen to. Like, I had a great time listening to this one. But alright, now for the ranking. Honestly, out of the albums I've listened to, this one really took me on one of the most interesting and unexpected journeys. So because of that, I'm gonna put this album right up there with Moving Pictures. Okay, album 356 is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. So honestly, I was never the biggest fan of this band. Like, well, I do enjoy all their hit songs. A little bit ago, I did try to listen to some full-length prog albums from them, like Selling England by the Pound and Foxtrot. But I don't know, neither of them really did much for me, to be honest. Like, there were a lot of tracks I liked individually, but as a whole, neither of the albums really had much going for them. However, I gotta say, even though I found parts of it a bit lackluster, this album was definitely one of the best things I've heard from them. I don't know why, but the delivery on this one just felt a lot more powerful and present. This album almost felt theatrical in a way, kind of similar to how The Wall was. Like each of the songs or a few selective songs were their own individual act. Then there were these several kind of climactic build-ups which I thought were pretty epic. And some of the more chill parts I also really did appreciate, like especially the synth and drum solo in Hairless Heart. But I don't know, while I do still like Phil Collins as a vocalist in general, for some reason I just don't really see his voice having as much power or energy to it compared to other prog rockers. And while in general I did really love the instrumentals on this album, there were some times where the synths especially could come off as a bit goofy. But honestly, those are my own little nitpicky critiques, and this was still overall a super solid and creative album. But alright, now time for the ranking. Mainly for uniqueness and ability to dabble in a bunch of different sounds. I think this album still deserves A tier, but definitely more towards the lower end. Alright, so the next album is Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones. And you know, even though there's nothing absolutely amazing or groundbreaking about this record, I'm not gonna rank it low because of that. Because like, this was a really fun album. And it just totally fulfilled its purpose as a solid rock record. So the only songs that I'd previously heard on this album were the opening and closing tracks, which definitely did not prepare me for the album in any way, shape, or form. And that is because the other songs sounded nothing like the opening or closer. Like, I was super shocked going into this super bluesy sounding track right after Gimme Shelter. Like, I haven't really heard much of the Stones' catalog, so I really had no idea they had songs like Country Honk and You Got the Silver, both being very very Bob Dylan-esque, or more so than their other songs at least. Though hey, I was all here for that. But yeah, I really did love the overall feel of this album. Most of the songs had a really leisurely and relaxing feel, especially when that ragtime piano got thrown into the mix. I'll put it in A tier, but I feel like it has to be below all the other records on here just because I feel like I can't say it's better than all of their musical technicalities. Okay, so at album 354 we got Channel Orange by Frank Ocean. This is an album I have not heard before and an artist I've heard very little of. So this record was definitely a nice change of pace as we haven't really encountered a soul or R&B album on this list yet. So I thought the first half of this album was a bit too minimal and slightly repetitive vocally for my liking. But the second half of this album was really good. Like the transition between Crack House and Pyramids was awesome. Also about the instrumentals on Pyramids, like I was not expecting these EDM dance instrumentals to work so well with this album. Like it was really shocking when they first started playing, but they really worked. So yeah, that was definitely one of my favorite tracks on this record. But yeah, I definitely liked the second half of this album a lot better. It felt much more bold instrumentally and vocally, and like that Andre 3000 feature, that was straight fire right there. So yeah, while there were a lot of really great and unique things about this album, I can't quite put it at A tier as there were just some songs I didn't love, and yeah, as I was saying, I don't know why, but the first half just didn't do much for me. Though don't get me wrong, it did have Thinking About You, and like that song right there is a true work of beauty. But yeah, taking all those things into account, we're gonna go with a middle B tier for this one. Alright, so the next album that I get the honor of talking about is Mr. Thug Isolation by Lil Ugly Mane. That was quite the spitball of words right there. So let me just start out by saying that the opening track did not prepare me at all for this album. Like it was so out of left field. But overall, this was definitely an album that I had mixed feelings with. So I'll start with the good. Instrumentally wise, this record was really good. It had like this amazing jazz, lo-fi, and electronic feel to it, and combined all those elements really wonderfully. Like, I've never really heard anything else quite like that sound in another hip-hop record. And like, some of it was so out there, it honestly didn't even fit with the sound of the man's vocals. But unfortunately, the instrumentals are just about the only positive thing I have to say about this record because, man, the lyrics and vocals were just not there. So granted, while rap isn't a genre I really listen to very often, I gotta say that compared to other rappers I've heard, this guy just didn't have much going for him. Like, there's so many other artists who have that similar style, but just rap it better. And on top of that, I also just didn't think the lyrical content was there. Like, I don't know, maybe some songs do have more of an in-depth meaning, but first impressions, the lyrics just seemed like they were glorifying and bragging about the gangsta life. Like, yeah, well, I get that's a whole major theme with rap music and all. There's also the rap that's all about bringing out the real dark nature of that stuff and exposing it for what it really is, and the consequences that it can lead to. And I don't know, rap music like that does so much more for me. And then there were just some lyrics that were uncomfortable in a different way. So yeah, it's a bit unfortunate, but because this really isn't my kind of music, like I could never see myself listening to this album again for any reason, I gotta put it at C or D tier. But you know, the instrumentals were really good, so I guess I gotta give it a C at least. But I did have to go through the pain of listening to this. Well, alright guys, that'll do it for this video. I would really enjoy your guys' feedback. If you like this, let me know, hit that like button, and I will be back next week with some more musical content. Peace out.